The same people who say Hamas is not responsible for its actions, it's always the external oppressor's fault. Those same people march in, BLM protests when things were being destroyed and properties being destroyed. They don't give agency to the people doing it. It's the system. And so it's all at a governmental power level that we need to co-opt that power and change the system in our image, burn it all down. It's a very destructive attitude, and I think that's unfortunately what Hollywood's gotten on board with, and a lot of people across the West have become resentful, bitter, and have a deep lack of gratitude.
Hello and welcome to State of the Nation. I'm Eylon Levy. Jewish history tells us sometimes we have two choices, to cry or to laugh. Sometimes a situation is so abnormal, so crazy that all you can do is shine a spotlight on how absurd it is and hope to drive change. That's the purpose of comedy for so many of the Jewish comedians who've been using their platforms, especially since October 7th, to try to use humor to make a serious point. My guest today is one of the comedians who's been trying to use humor to get through hard times. Ami Kozak is a musician, comedian, impressionist, we'll see some of his impressions here on the show, and host of the podcast Ami's House. He's also a one-man Israel advocate, a kind of citizen spokesman of the kind we're trying to inspire here, using his platform to go give media interviews and speak up for his people. Together, we talk about whether the people attacking Israel are driven more out of ignorance or malice, why he gave an interview to notorious anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist Candace Owens, and why he believes that the entertainment space has become so unfriendly, even for Jews who want to speak up for Israel and even against anti-Semitism. Watch to the end to get some of Ami Kozak's impressions, and I promise you his Yihya Sinwar impression is not to be missed. I'm Eylon Levy. Welcome to State of a Nation.
Breaking news out of Israel this morning.
Shocking hostage taking.
Hundreds of Israelis are dead.
I want to bring in Israeli government spokesman.
Eylon. What happens with a 4-day pause?
How do you resolve this?
Where does this go?
Ami Kozak in the house.
Great to be here, Eylon. Thanks for having me.
You have your podcast Ami's House. This is my house, so welcome.
Eylon's house. We love Eylon's house. Great to be here. Thanks.
What brings you to Israel now? What is this? A family vacation, solidarity visit, fishing a little bit of content and inspiration for some comedy?
It is a family trip primarily for the holidays, for the Chagim, but I'm a content creator, so I'm being very bad as my kids are trying to get my attention and I'm just storing the whole time. But it's been amazing.
Because it's such a crazy period now with the war going on. There's a very heavy atmosphere,
Sure.
but as well, there's something about life in Israel that is so absurd, so abnormal. It's part of what makes it difficult to communicate the reality in this country abroad that I'm sure you're looking around going, hang on, that's not normal, and getting ideas for jokes.
Right. Well, yeah, so it's always you're always conflicted because, especially during a time of war, most of the time, Israel always has this weird brand to people who don't know any better that, oh my God, you're going to Israel? Isn't it like crazy there? And most of the time, you're conveying that it's not. It's normal. It's thriving. There's life here. And you still want to convey that. And it's true. But there also is a real war, and you don't want to downplay the severity and gravity of that. But it's amazing that a testament to the Israeli people and Israeli society that they can flip it on and off like a light switch. Like, it's really a binary where it's serious and intense when it's intense, and then it's back to life. And you really only see that in Israel. I mean, I'm in Tel Aviv, and when there's no siren, and when there's nothing going on, and I was there for 2 days, and we were very lucky, it was quiet, everyone goes about their business, and things are alive, and it's unbelievable. It's just like, the place is alive, and once you're here on the ground, I think when you spend all your time doom scrolling outside of Israel, just looking at the headlines, it can even affect those who know better and know what's really going on. It just emotionally has this effect on you. But once you're here, you never feel safer than when you're amongst the people.
And Israelis are pretty funny characters, right? I'm sure you've come a lot of what they say in Hebrew tipusim, like a lot of really funny characters while you're here.
Well, it's weird. Like, Israel is so relaxed and chill about everything. First of all, I say this in my stand-up, that like, the way the pro-Israel community outside of Israel is reacting to the war is very different than the way Israelis are experiencing the war. Because we're like on our phones like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, they're being attacked, and we see missiles and they're coming in and we're freaking out and we're getting all distressed. But if you turn on the sound to any one of these videos, it's just some Israeli guy going, wow, Eza, why? It's okay, they're not landing, it's okay. What? Yo. And like, they're just taking it all in stride. So that's an impressive testament to the like resilience and being able to just live through it, literally, in every way. And also just, it's weird, like when you get here, Israelis have a weird thing on liability. Like there's certain things they're very strict about and certain things they're so lax about. Like I took a camel ride with my family. We went along along the cliff with some Bedouins, and we're over the edge, and we're looking here, and we went to En Gedi, and like we're going over a cliff, and I'm holding a kid, and you never ask an Israeli tour guide if it's going to be easy. You'll never get the right answer because they have a different standard of what's easy versus American dad bods. They're like, it's small children can do it, it's fine, and then you're climbing Mount Kilimanjaro with a toddler on your back, and he's like, it's maybe 15 minutes, easy, you're walking. Everything is a hike here. Everything is a hike. The cardio in Jerusalem is off the charts. But I'll say this about liability, like, so you can be on the side of a cliff risking your whole family's life almost hanging over, and that's fine. But if you get in a cab with one too many people, zasul. And they're like very nervous about that. So it's an interesting dynamic.
I think you're building lots of new characters for the next repertoire. I want to talk to you today about the comedy you've been doing. Because it's not just getting on stage and making people laugh. There's a purpose to it. There's a message you're trying to convey. It's not just lightening the mood. So tell me, when you get up and you do stand-up, and specifically when you focus on the Israel stuff, what are you trying to achieve through the comedy?
Well, I always, on my public profile for many years as I've been building it up, it's been to make people laugh. And that's been my main function, is like getting up there, doing impressions, bits. And the idea was just to, be entertained. I didn't have a specific agenda. I wasn't necessarily political on my public platforms. But then October 7th changed that. October 7th was a real changing moment for everybody. Because I think while Israel was experiencing October 7th and all of that profound trauma, outside of Israel, and it's not a comparison by any means, but we experienced October 8th, which was this, the range of indifference to October 7th, apathy, and support to what was going on. And I all of a sudden lived in a world where I'm a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, and I was never one of those people with the temperament to say, hey, it could happen here in America, it could happen here in the West, it could happen again. I had friends with that mentality. You grow up with that sort of generational, hearing the stories and the trauma of that, of what your grandparents went through. And you always had this burning question. And I was never one of these kids that could ever think it would happen again. But I always had the burning question, how did it happen? Like, how did it happen to the Jews in Germany and Europe and Poland in the 1930s? Like, how did it really happen? How could that have happened in a modern world? This wasn't the olden days of ancient Jew hatred. This was a modern, civilized society. How did it happen? And on October 8th, I didn't have that question anymore. I suddenly realized, this is what you have to do. It's not just the monsters who perpetuate and commit the atrocities on October 7th that allow that to happen. That's not just how these things happen. It's those who make excuses for it, those who apologize for it, those who say there's a context, those who become apologists for monsters. That's how these things really happen in not just the Middle East, but the ivory towers of the West.
I mean, this all sounds rather grim. Are you telling me this is fodder for your comedy?
Correct.
How do you make comedy out of this?
So I took to my social media first. I got a little lost. We call it the weave, as Trump says, it's the weave. I go back and forth. But basically, I then, on October 8th, got on my social media, maybe October 9th, and said, I'm not going to make jokes right now because to me, comedy exists in a world where we all actually respect each other's individual rights and sovereignty to be respected. And in a world where that feels completely backwards and flipped on its head, like making comedy in that and making jokes right at that moment, like those days are numbered. We're not going to last very long in a Western civilized society if we don't actually, at base level, actually respect each other and respect each other's right to self-defense and to life and to things like that. So I started making serious videos just talking about the situation. And I felt that actually helped to articulate positions that I think a lot of people felt internally, sort of the silent majority that wanted to express support but had been confused by the language of it's complicated, there's a context, this is an old conflict, and they had been confused by all of that language, even just calling it a conflict, and giving voice to that I found was very helpful for me to get that off my chest, but it apparently provided a lot of help for a lot of people. That slowly morphed into some satire to use some comedic abilities that I had to, essentially try to shine light on the truth, because commentary or comedy or whatever's going on and whatever you're talking about, it's all about trying to chisel away at what the truth of the matter is. And comedy revolves around highlighting a truth. You're doing it through a comedic lens, but when somebody laughs at something, they're experiencing something that they feel is true, viscerally true. And when you do a joke about something or satirize something, you're revealing a truth, you know? So I still try to get on stage and make jokes and make people laugh and entertain, but when I'm doing certain videos with a satirical angle, it's really aimed at exposing just the lunacy of what we have found ourselves in talking about this topic.
And you expose that lunacy and help people break a fear barrier, essentially, to speaking, because the comedy loosens them up a little bit.
Right, right. And I just think when you, like there's no more powerful way to do that, because if something really works comedically, it means you're hitting on something true and resonant. It means you're touching on something that everybody sort of sees, but can't quite say, can't quite articulate, whether you're doing it in a serious way through commentary, but with comedy, it almost subverts the like conscious mind and gets into like the subconscious. It's like, oh, well, you can't deny that this works. If it works in a comedic sense, you're hitting on something.
I remember the great Mel Brooks once said, explaining the thinking behind The Producers, which is still, I think, my favorite musical after Hamilton. He said, you know, you can't get up on a soapbox and debate with a dictator because they're rabble-rousers and they know how to work the crowd. But if you can make people laugh at them, that's what they hate. You can ridicule them. So how do you make people laugh at the villains of our modern era?
Well, yeah, I think also the testament of, like, what's the best celebration of like
do I want to see a Sinwar impression from you?
I don't think so. That's all. I was entertaining some soldiers last night, and the only joke that worked because of the language, I was trying to do Trump for them. They were like, they weren't quite getting it. But then someone said, do a Sinwar, and I just went. And if that offends you, you have a problem. It's so weird seeing all these like weird Twitter monsters out there showing admiration. But that's all I got, you know, because, you know. That's it. However much of that you want to cut, it's fine. But
no, it's okay.
That's my Seymour impression.
You know what? I'll use this
before. After.
I'll use this as an opportunity for all those who are listening on the audio platforms to remind them that this show is in fact on YouTube. If you hop off Spotify,
if you want to see what I
go
just
on
did,
YouTube, then you will see Ami Kozak's very elegant Sinwar impression. So tell me, your comedy since October 7th has become more Israel-centric, more Jewish-centric?
Well, the thing is, when you're, you know, I think I've just become, even though I grew up a modern Orthodox Jew, like my identity, I think everyone's identity on October 8th, like October 7th into October 8th, in the days after, like my Jewish identity, and I think for a lot of people, like one of two things happened. Either you became like ashamed or proud. It's almost like I felt like the Jewish identity was summoned to the forefront. It's almost like when any kind of grieving happens or tragedy, all the trivial stuff in life kind of melts away. And I'm not trying to say that what I do for fun and for work is trivial per se, but at my core, those core values, those core senses of what your identity is, those come forward. And I think that there was this sense of, you know, collective solidarity across the Jewish world. And then I felt this sort of sadness for people who either grew up not feeling so connected to it and felt lost, like, what does this mean for me? Who am I in this scenario? What do I play? Because if all of a sudden talking about Israel and support for Israel and support for the Jewish community is now a controversial thing to do. I mean, the weirdest thing is somehow defending Jewish people and defending Israel was brave. I mean, that was such a strange place to be. And like to call that brave is so weird. You would never say, you know, speaking out against racism, you're so brave to do that. I mean, it says something more about the society as a whole than it does about you if defending against anti-Semitism is a brave statement. So my comedy, I think I felt this sense of, call it a responsibility to really, I'd been doing it a little bit, but I do comedy for sort of the general world, but also having a community that you can go inside baseball with and do stuff that you understand and can resonate with is a special relationship. So I wanted to kind of lean into that as well.
But that's important because I know many figures in entertainment have been very timid, cowardly. If we're calling people who speak up for Israel and the Jewish people brave, then we'll say those who shy away from it are cowardly. They don't want to touch it. They know there's a personal or professional cost.
Right.
The families of the 6 executed hostages wrote in Time magazine about how they would meet celebrities, people from the world of entertainment who would offer them reassurance behind the scenes, but say, look, please don't tell anyone that we met, because they know that their fans will come after them. And as someone who straddles that world and does the insider jokes for the Jewish audiences, but also general, Have you found any sort of backlash because you've been more vocal about Israel and the Jewish people? Are you building a niche? Are you boxing yourself in? What's happening?
Yeah, it's definitely both. I mean, when I first started speaking out, I think I probably, I lost like 15,000 followers on social media or something like that. Yeah, us influencers are hurting too, okay? Wow. No.
I
lost like 15,000 followers.
This is something people don't realize, that influencers are losing followers at first. I mean, I did a video with Casey Neistat, the YouTuber in New York, when I was still a government spokesman. Mm-hmm. He lost a few thousand followers just because we did a video together. Now, he's in an attitude that says, I don't care. I need to speak up for the truth. I need to speak up for my people, and they can go whatever.
Yeah, no, I just don't. I feel bad given everything that's going on, to lose a few thousand followers on Instagram is not the biggest tragedy in any way. But the thing is, it was weird. It was like, which people out there in that cross-section of fans, like Jordan Peterson impressions, like Gary V impressions, and Hamas? I mean, that was just strange to me. It was strange to see that exist. And so I was happy to see them go. But at the same time, I was able to, reach a different audience of people through some of the advocacy stuff, which was encouraging. And yeah, I'm of two minds about how I cast judgment on the people who are too scared and timid to say things. On the one hand, yeah, hardcore judgmental. I mean, are you kidding me? Is it after October 7th, seeing this, like, is it really hard to see, generally speaking, who are the virtuous ones and who are the villainous ones? Can you really not tell the difference? Is that difficult? Like, that was insane to me to see that. But at the same time, I wonder how productive it is. Either you can cast judgment, or what I tried to do is articulate and give voice to those who do want to speak out, but maybe have been co-opted and confused by the language of this whole thing that's been gone on. Because very quickly after October 7th, you saw some Israeli flags go up on certain things and governments standing in solidarity, but within a week or whatever, you started seeing all the moral confusion set in. And I take for granted that I've been involved in the subject and educated on the subject and felt close to Israel and been here before and know a lot about it, or more than the average person. So if you haven't been, I don't know, you could see why you could, if I'm being gracious, slip into those confused spaces of, I want to speak out, but yeah, I do see that they're suffering, and you just see this kind of thing and are not able to attribute the proper agency to who's responsible, and you can get lost in that. So maybe it's best to try to give voice to the people who would want to articulate those positions but don't know how best to do so. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on that front. This is what I'm feeling. But as far as people who do have big public audiences at the same time, or are worried about losing, you're worried about, what does that say about the state of your industry? What does that say about the people who support you or you work with, if by supporting Israel or speaking out on behalf of the victims of the Nova Music Festival or showing up at an event like that, you're scared to do that? Then what are you really saying about yourself and the people you surround yourself with? Maybe it's time for a reevaluation. At the end of the day, all I can do is speak up for what I think is most true and resonant and try to shed light on that. But it's certainly, that was also super disturbing, because evil triumphs when good men do nothing. That's the phrase, I think. But this is what I felt, this sort of collective, on October 8th, the feeling was not only just looking at the human tragedy and atrocities that had happened, but this sort of, This is what the collective sort of figures in Hollywood, or even Jewish figures who didn't want to speak out, were just like, I don't want to say anything. It's weird. It's awkward. It feels, and that is so heartbreaking. That feels like such a betrayal, to have to reach out for a hand and the hand goes like that.
Let me pose that question to you then. What does it say about the modern entertainment industry if Jews are afraid to speak up, even for the victims of the Nova Music Festival, even for the hostages, and again, for those who are following on the audio platforms, Ami is doing this sort of defensive, shielding his face, don't hurt me gesture that we would all recognize.
I don't want to get involved, it's awkward, yeah. I don't want to say anything.
Trying to hide. What does it say about the modern entertainment industry, and what do we do about it?
I think it says something about the idea that a lot of the political and social and cultural causes that Hollywood gets behind, particularly that it leans to the left, and they get behind causes not for genuine reasons necessarily, but just because it's a socially acceptable, trending thing to do. And, you see corporate America doing the same thing. I think it does show the influence of sort of the worst ideas of the left that have permeated a lot of Hollywood, mainstream media, and corporate culture. That we view everything in terms of these identity politics, groups, oppressor and oppressed. We attribute that to racial immutable characteristics. If we call the Zionists white settler colonialists and attribute them as whiteness, representing whiteness in the American context, and we attribute the Palestinian cause to brownness, to BLM, we certainly, there's a greater fear of being called a racist and being not on board with the progressive values and agendas of the day. That fear is greater than speaking out on behalf of whatever, and that causes a certain hesitancy to speak out on behalf of the Jewish community, the Israel community, because to speak out on behalf of those that are prosperous, those that have even the values that I share, that makes me somehow, there's this cultural relativism that exists where, I can't speak out against that. That makes me somehow in that category of right-wing, far-right, white supremacists, and they've framed everything through this false lens that's really distorted basic senses of morality. And I think they do that. One is a lot of, it's hard to say that it's really genuine. It's more that this is what the causes are. And I think at the end of the day, people do want to be good, but they want to attach good to what the tides in the culture are telling them are the good causes. And I think that's what's motivating a lot of the college campuses too. A lot of these things are, we want to be on the side of some virtuous cause, and this is what seems to be the collective determination through this lens, oppressor, oppressed. This is what's determined to be how we view the world. And it's all kind of ridiculous because they're basing it on, not the traits and actions of, what people do, like evaluating if Israel is a fundamentally good country that respects individual rights, that's free, that's a liberal, progressive society in the sense that actually aligns with them. No, because they view that as bad. If it's like America, it's bad because we've seen, in the culture as represented, American values have been looked at as villainous and bad. And that's, I think a lot of it is reflected in what you've seen in why a lot of people in Hollywood are either shy or in solidarity with these anti-liberal causes.
That's tragic.
They share a common enemy.
That's tragic because we often think that in order to drum up support, we need to remind our allies how much we have in common, that we have shared interests, that we have shared values. And you're saying, actually, it's precisely the impression that there are shared values that's the problem. Correct.
I mean, the same people hating on Israel in the West are also burning American flags and kicking down Grand Central Station and hate capitalism and freedom and those kinds of things. They've said that's whiteness. I don't know what the hell that means, but that's what they're saying. So in a way, to flaunt that Israel is like them and shares values that they have learned to take for granted, not appreciate. I mean, it's always easy to say those things when you grow up with all the privileges of a tolerant society. I've posed this question, I've never gotten an answer. When people fight for a free Palestine, and I say, would women be free in a free Palestine? To the musicians who are marching in the street, would musicians be free to make whatever kind of music they make in a free Palestine? If you're a free speech advocate, journalists, critics condemning Israel, would you be free to write whatever you wanted about the Palestinian Authority in a free Palestine? What exactly are you fighting for, values-wise? And since people aren't determining this by values, but rather by identity politics and by this sort of intersectionality metric, where do people fall on this weird hierarchy based on race that we've determined certain groups always being bad and certain groups always being virtuous? It also allows them to say they have no agency. The same people who say Hamas is not responsible for its actions, it's always the external oppressor's fault. Those same people march in, BLM protests when things were being destroyed and properties being destroyed. They don't give agency to the people doing it. It's the system. And so it's all at a governmental power level that we need to co-opt that power and change the system in our image, burn it all down. It's a very destructive attitude. And I think that's, unfortunately, what Hollywood's gotten on board with, and a lot of people across the West have become resentful, bitter, and have a deep lack of gratitude for the standard of living and the rights that they've been protected and afforded over these years. And so I don't know where it really deeply stems from, but that's a real problem because the moment you try to show Israel in that light, they just resent it more,
That's fascinating. And you're trying to make these points not only through comedy, but also by media appearances. And I have to say, I doff my cap to you that you've been giving interviews really embodying the spirit of what we here call citizen spokespeople who aren't in any official capacity, but say, I have a voice, I have a platform, I'm going to use it to speak up for my people. And you've given interviews to friendly outlets, but you've also really thrown yourself in the lion's den. And I was particularly intrigued by an interview you gave to Candace Owens, who has gone full wacko anti-Semite. I mean, full wacko Kabbalist pedophile, full wacko, talking about how Israel assassinated John F. Kennedy, she claimed, and making other bizarre claims. One of the people who I often wonder, is there any point engaging? Is it worth having a conversation with them? Are they so far lost? Is it bad faith? I mean, let's just watch a short clip of her so viewers who are less familiar with Candace Owens understand what we're talking about.
Do you think it's normal, by the way, that basically every person who speaks about Israel has to basically say a statement that's like, you know, I don't want to get killed? Like, this is fucking normal. Like literally, you start speaking about it, people are like, Candace, beef up your security. That's not fucking normal. Like, excuse my language, but like, that is not normal, okay? It's not normal that people have to think about their security because, and by the way, it's not normal that then the way that you get comfortable with it is you're like, well, you know, they shot JFK in an open car, so there's not, I mean, he's a sitting president. I mean, obviously my security doesn't really matter. If they want me, they're going to get me. That's not a normal thought process to have. We don't have that about any other country in the world except for the one that, you know, took over ours. And that's the truth, okay? We are an occupied nation. And if it's going to take women like having to speak up and say that to make permission, like to give permission to men to do the same, then I'm happy to be the first person, okay? I just want to be clear. Anything happens to me, blame the Zionists. Like 1,000% blame the Zionists. Like let that be my parting word.
So Candace Owens, full-blown anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist, and you gave her an interview. Why?
Well, I think Israel has made mistakes. Just kidding. Well, here's the thing. I think that there's a degree here. There's like a timeline. And I think, especially, you know this in like the media space, you know, people see a whole slew of things. They don't know the sequence of things and the timing at which, you know, we've overlapped. But I'll kind of tell that sequence and then that will kind of shed light on your, help explain the question. Because it all started for her and me, and she's in the green room, so we'll talk about it after here for the show. No, with Candace, initially, you know, before all this stuff happened, she was like a fan of some of my impressions, and I don't care what you think about Israel if you're a fan of me. No, she was a fan of stuff online, and I think post-October 7th, when some of this started, it initially started it was confusing, certainly, because she was in an environment where you had a lot of very articulate pro-Israel voices that could make a case at the Daily Wire of what was going on here. And it was certainly strange for me to see, in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, criticism of, before Israel did a thing, before Israel went into Gaza in response, before there was any sort of retaliation, you know, the first words not to be sympathetic, but rather critical. We don't want to be involved in this, and I think some of that is attributable for some of the people like Tucker Carlson and Candace. There's a sort of sense of isolationism that has entered the right-wing spheres in the American politics and political culture of like, Iraq was a disaster, all this is a disaster, we don't want to be involved. But then she started being critical and then retweeted the Queen of Jordan. And she had issues with the Jewish community in the past because of the whole Kanye stuff like a year earlier. So things were kind of being set in motion. But then she retweets the Queen of Jordan's statement about how Jews are weaponizing anti-Semitism to silence people into compliance. And I responded very firmly on Twitter saying, no. We're not weaponizing anything. And it's true that actually, to be fair, there have been sort of more left-of-center Jewish organizations that were calling things anti-Semitic that weren't. And I think it was a product of a lot of, you know, you could call it on left-of-center organizations to mistakenly do that. And I think we pay the price for that by calling everything that's, you know, not racist, calling anything that you may disagree with, like Whoopi Goldberg says the wrong thing on The View, anti-Semite. If you use that word too much, I interviewed Rabbi Whoopi on my show, and he said it loses cultural power. And we must reserve the term anti-Semite for those who really deserve the term. Otherwise, it does lose cultural power, and I think we've seen a result of that. But back to my timeline here with Candace. So she retweets the Queen of Jordan, and I responded very firmly. Now, to Candace's credit, she reached out to me and invited me on her show. This was like this is like November, okay? Like this is like the first few weeks afterwards, when it really was just focused about Israel and Gaza and what's going on there. And she was pretty straightforward with me about not knowing much about the subject, and the conversation was in good faith. And it was a really productive, constructive conversation. She left the whole thing up unedited, so she didn't play any games or anything like that. And I took it to, at that point, this is November, we as a community often, we pat ourselves on the back when we see things we disagree with by writing articles and doing hit pieces and calling people out in our selfie videos. But that's not calling somebody out, in a sense. You can do that, but all you do is really reaffirm the positions of those who already agree with you. And for me, I was just trying to engage and have a conversation and see what's really going on. And not to be threatening, not to have a gotcha moment, just to really find out what's going on. What are you thinking? Because I think we make the mistake of seeing people in general misunderstand what's going on about Israel and attribute malice to them immediately, when really, same thing happened with like Joe Rogan. He said something on his show, it was like, it does kind of look like a genocide, it's crazy. And when people in the community are like, another anti-Semite, like, you know, a lot of these accounts were naming Joe Rogan the next anti-Semite. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, what people like that who are ignorant are reflecting is a perception of the war. You have to take that for what it's worth. There's a real perception out there. Doesn't reflect reality, but the perception is something that you have to value and you have to understand, okay, if that's what he perceives, the very next week he had Coleman Hughes on and they had a great conversation. So now he's back to not being an anti-Semite, right? So we have to be careful on throwing the term around. Now, I will say, we had a great conversation, and I think it was an example of, in a world of where people are throwing such like mud at each other and just screaming matches, and you know, we've seen the media circus where it's just sound bites and getting your point out, and some people are using ad hominem attacks. I wanted to try to be an example of like, look, like this is what it is. Like you said, what was the term you used? Citizen spokespeople. Spokespeople, to get out there and actually, I was speaking on behalf of myself too, in my experience, and you know, and there were moments, look, she made a comment in that first conversation where she talked about the Muslim quarters, and everyone took that opportunity to say Muslim quarters, like quarter, not understanding the difference and other. But she kind of said, like, I actually didn't know. Maybe I got it wrong. Everybody ignored that second half. So I was actually very proud of that first conversation. Since that conversation, as we're seeing here.
Wait, hang on. In that conversation,
yes,
did you feel that you convinced her of anything? Did you feel that you were able to shift the needle to help her realize things she hadn't understood? Because I'm fascinated by this position that actually a lot of what we attribute to malice sometimes is simply ignorance.
Correct.
Good faith ignorance.
On the heels of that argument, I got a lot of people asking me questions about it, and I always said, like, ignorance is much easier to fix than hate. And if you react to ignorance with shouting, screaming, condemnation, and I'm not taking any responsibility away from her, but what you're doing is you're not going to bring them closer to you. You're going to push them further away. Maybe at some point they deserve that, and they earn that themselves. But I was trying at that moment in time to bridge the gap and bring some, and I felt like I did move the needle at that point.
Because I was really intrigued by a moment where she was talking about, you know, Jewish supremacy, and you said Jews are a multiracial. Jews are not a race. Jews are a multiracial people, and you see the moment that sort of the cogs are turning in her brain. She says, that's the first time
I've heard that.
And
it can be confusing. We take for granted what we know. Well, there's a component of race to being a Jew in that it's passed down. You know, you're born Jewish, right? So that implies race. However, it's a multiracial, multi-ethnic tribe family of sorts, which is a unique kind of thing. In the same way being Jewish is unique, anti-Semitism is unique. And I think articulating those positions is important. So the hatred of Jews is unique, and the identity of being Jewish is unique. And that's fair to not know that. But, you know, I think for certain people, you have to ask yourself at a certain point, because our conversations were in good faith and I appreciated them, but are you driven more temperamentally by critical thinking and analysis and evidence, or by temperament and how you feel about certain people? So her and I got along. We had a nice civil discussion. I appreciated those opportunities to have those conversations, because in between our first conversation and second conversation, I kept seeing her publicly just say things that were more and more objectionable to me, obviously, as the things that you just played here.
You had offline discussions as well?
Not really, no. It was more just, maybe I responded to a tweet here and there like, oh, come on, Candace, like we spoke about this, like this, I don't know what's going on, but it seemed to be not just motivated by data, or not even primarily, but more about a relationship to the community where there was, and I think for her, I'm not getting too psychoanalytical here, but temperament and how she feels in terms of those relationships can have an effect. But she started saying things that were like really, really objectionable and then hateful and dabbling in these conspiracies and tropes. So I reached out again. She had me on again. I ended up having a debate with Dave Smith, which was another comedian who's been on the critical side of being very critical on Israel. And it was like he represented sort of that position. And we had a public debate, and then her and I had a continued conversation where the supremacy stuff came up and the racial components about being Jewish came up. I thought that was good too, but then in the days after that, that's when the, like, you know, minimizing the Holocaust stuff came up about saying how some of these claims about Mengele experiments are absurd and just kind of toying with these ideas rather recklessly and kind of being, and then claiming to be a little bit aloof. Oh, I was just kind of saying, you know, but when you have a huge audience and a huge platform, I mean, the difference in the comment section from our first conversation versus our second one is night and day. Our first conversation had a lot of like, that was a great conversation. The second one was just raging anti-Semitism all over the comments. And if you're going to build this little platform in the corner of the internet in the deep, dark abyss, I mean, that's her prerogative to do that. I find it really unfortunate. I don't want to get too in. I made a point to her in our second conversation that, look, I think the mistake is if I call you an anti-Semite, then I'm telling you what's going on in here. And at the end of the day, I don't know what's going on internally with you. Nobody does. So you can tell me all day, I have no animosity towards Jewish people. I don't hate Jewish people. I really don't. And I'll believe you. And I think a lot of people will say, I don't believe you. But I'm really judging your external behavior and what you're doing on the outside and the statements you're making that either show that you're completely insensitive and unaware of what's happened to the Jewish community over the decades and centuries, or you know, and then there's a darker element to it. But I'm just saying, let's talk about what you've said and the statements you've made. And yeah, it's been really, really, really disturbing and objectionable. So I think at this point, I don't know. You know, I'm at a loss. To see that happen was pretty disappointing.
And I hope there's an opening there to tackle ignorance where otherwise we see malice. But I think there's a point at which certain public figures, you have to say, either they're so far lost down the conspiracy theory hole, or they are deliberately, they know exactly what buttons they are pushing because they are building a certain following. And there has always been an advantage to pushing conspiracy theories against Jews because you have a captive audience, so to speak. And I wonder then, when you engage either with these figures, and really very brave of you for doing so, or even go on mainstream traditional media, you've often been a little bit critical of how Israel handles its public diplomacy, perhaps of being a little bit defensive. Tell me, from your perspective, having done these interviews as a sort of one-man citizen spokesperson yourself, what do you think the most effective approaches are to dissipating the ignorance, the hatred, and beginning to shift public opinion to our side?
I generally think that to the extent that Israel, if it's going to say, which I agree with, that it's justified in defending itself in a just war, then you don't want to undermine that statement by then ceding territory in the debate to trying to appease the condemnation. In other words, to the extent that Israel asserts itself as being just and moral in this war, and it conducts itself that way, asserting its strength and asserting its moral clarity on this, then it wins in the long run, in both victoriously militarily against its enemies directly, and it wins, I think, the respect, if not, even if they won't agree, and they'll still condemn, there's a certain respect both in the Middle East, in this world, and in the West, by simply saying, I don't have to appease your false sense of morality in order to feel just in continuing. And I find oftentimes, and I'll give specific examples, for example, when we get out there and we try to say, on the one hand, Hamas is entirely responsible for what's happened in Gaza. They have attacked Israel. They have committed the aggression. And now there is a war. And they are responsible for those consequences. So we make that statement. And then I've seen, but at the same time, we are doing everything we can to minimize the suffering, and we have to make sure we're sending in trucks and humanitarian aid. Then you are taking responsibility for the suffering. You are doing that. I'm not denying that they're suffering and that it's tragic. But if you say on the one hand it's Hamas's responsibility, and then on the other hand, take responsibility, not primarily for defending Israel's sovereignty and safety, but trying to do this thing and sending soldiers into harm's way and then displacing your own citizens. Now, I don't know the military reasons behind what takes place. I'm not a tactician. I'm not plugged in at that level at all. And I don't claim to know and don't want to dictate what the policy should be necessarily. But in terms of messaging, in terms of messaging, you're getting out there and you're trying to basically, in doing so, say, no, we're the good guys not because we're defending ourselves. We're the good guys because we're taking responsibility for the direct suffering that's going on, rather than actually putting the responsibility fully on Hamas. In a way, you're taking it off of them, off of the agency of Hamas to do that. We have made that case that it's their responsibility. They've taken all the supplies, they've taken all the aid that they've gotten and squandered it, sure. But then Israel is also trying to be this paternalistic figure where it says we gave them autonomy, we gave them their opportunity to build a state, but we also are trying to take responsibility. And I think there's these competing values that happen in that case, because effectively when you do that, you undermine yourself on the world stage and you undermine yourself in terms of as a state where primarily Israel is responsible for protecting the safety of its civilians. And in trying to get out there and say, imagine if you just said to somebody when they're trying to say like, this aid truck did, you're like, it's 700 trucks. We sent it 700. Now it's only 50. It's like, why would we be sending aid trucks to Hamas territory that's going to loot them and destroy them? Why are we sending those in? And it sounds like a harsh position, but the truth is a quick, swift war where the standard is victory for the safety and security of Israel's sovereignty and its civilian population and its citizens, that's the goal. And you fight that battle against yourself when you get out on a panel against people who you're trying to win the appeasement of those who will hate you anyway.
I think that's a fascinating point, and you hear world leaders saying civilians must be protected, civilians must be protected. I've made the point, Israeli civilians must be protected. Who's speaking up for them? Only Israel. And when world leaders say, protecting Palestinian civilians is the most important thing in this war, I say Israel's first duty is to protect its citizens. And along the way, it will do everything it can under the rules of international law, but its first duty is to protect our citizens from a barbaric, murderous attack. But Israel finds itself caught in this bind because on the one hand, we do need to emphasize the humanitarian efforts. It is important because we know that scenes of humanitarian suffering will cause the political support for us among world leaders to erode. And therefore, they need to be convinced that we are attending to their needs and interests so they can continue giving us the political support.
But how is that going?
But on the other hand, there's this Israeli tendency to say, look at how much we're suckers. Look at how much we're letting ourselves be exploited. Our only obligation is to facilitate the provision of humanitarian aid to the extent that it is not being hijacked by the enemy. And we know that Hamas is hijacking the aid, and we're continuing to send it in because look what suckers we are, and look how much we care about citizens on the other side. But you find yourself caught in that trap when ultimately there are no good answers, because clearly the fact that over 1 million tons of aid on something well over 50,000 trucks have gone in since the beginning of the war matters absolutely nothing.
I see no applause for that on the world stage to Israel. And at the end of the day,
no congratulations for going above and beyond its obligations under international law. It
also just doesn't seem to me that the people condemning Israel have any interest in reducing the Palestinian suffering.
None. And you know how I know they have none? You know how they know they have none? Yeah. Because Israel, after killing Sinwar, gave Hamas terrorists an option. It offered them an amnesty. It said, if you release the hostages, surrender, leave with your hands above your head, we will let you live and we will let you leave Gaza. And this war can end. And I have not seen anyone within the pro-Palestinian media, entertainment, social media space urging Palestinian terrorists to take up Israel's generous offer, lay down their arms, just release the hostages. And it's because they want Hamas to continue fighting, and they want to see dead Israelis more than they want to see live Palestinians. This tragedy is on them. They need to own it. And I'm wondering then, when you say that Israel maybe has to go on the offensive a little bit more, how that plugs into going on the offensive against the journalists and social media activists who are taking the Palestinian side in saying, you are the ones who are encouraging and celebrating this barbaric violence. It has consequences. You own this. This is on you. How do we take the fight to them and make them realize that when they chant from the river to the sea in Intifada, they're not just projecting their own fantasies on a country far, far away. They are encouraging violence that has real-world consequences. They are part of Hamas's strategy because it looks at what is going on in the world and says, the more we keep fighting, the more people are going to support us on university campuses, and the more that isolates Israel. Let's keep going. You are facilitating Hamas's human shield strategy. How do you take the fight to these people and make them realize they're not just cosplaying from the sidelines. They are actors in this war.
Yeah, I think you have to not waste energy. They would wake up real quick if what they were advocating for came to their doorstep. I mean, Bill Maher said on his show once, if Bella Hadid found herself in Gaza, she would run to Tel Aviv in 5 minutes. What they're advocating...
I don't think she'd find a very adoring audience here in Tel Aviv.
They wouldn't be adoring, but they wouldn't kill her. And what I'm saying is, when things get real, Douglas Murray said, like, when it comes to their doorstep, they're going to be asking their enemies what your pronouns are. We'll see about that. When things get real at a certain point, when they realize the values and the society and the culture they're advocating for, that's going to be, the consequences of that advocacy will be theirs to pay for. In the meantime, I'd rather focus the energy on, the probably 70%, 75% of the people out there who kind of generally know who the good guys are and the bad guys are in this scenario. I think a lot of these kids are, like I said, buying into these woke, worst ideas of the left, identity politics, and they're attributing this to a weird American lens of oppressor and oppressed, and they want to feel virtuous in their time in university, and they're taking to the streets. And, even in a recent interview, I think with Barry Weiss, Douglas was saying how, like, what you're advocating for when you say, Intifada revolution is the blowing up of suicide bombers at a cafe of your friends. Is that what you want? Is that what you want? Is that what you really want? I think they just glorify and fetishize these ideas because if you're unhappy in your own life and things aren't going right and you feel directionless and lost, there's a choice. You can blame yourself or you can blame others. And people seldom blame themselves in those scenarios. So it's much easier to blame the system, to blame the West, the patriarchy, all of these kinds of things, to attribute the problems that you have going on with yourself or your lack of direction, your lack of core purpose, lack of sense of community. There it is right there. This is a community. It's not very attractive physically, but what are you going to do? There's your community. This is what's going on. And if you know nothing about anything, hey, don't you want to get on board with the virtuous pro-Palestinian cause? Sure, this is what we're all doing. We're camping. I'm not in class. Hopefully, I would assume they would mature out of that at some point. In the meantime, to the people who have an inclination to a better sense of what's moral here, I try to appeal to them, and in the meantime, not compromise Israel's moral superiority in this conflict, and not compromise what it has to do to try to appease those who are, so far gone and are in it for different reasons, I think, in a sense,
Ami, this has been fantastic, and I'm really excited not only to have you on the podcast, but also I think we can switch the cameras off now because we're going to do some preparation. You're going to help me prepare for some of the next podcast guests that I have. And I want to ask them why they think it is so important to advocate for Israel. And I want you to help me prepare, okay? How I would ask this question. Well, let's start with our friend Douglas Murray. Why is it important to speak for Israel?
Well, so Douglas Murray, yes. Well, you have to realize that you're fighting an enemy, Eylon, that is not only committing these atrocities, but they were absolutely elated when they did it. And I'm sorry, Hezbollah says, oh, no, we just want to fire rockets in peace. Well, I'll tell you this. I want Israel to win, Eylon. And that's what I want. I would like a world in which there's a liberal democracy in the Middle East that protects the rights of its citizens. And I care very deeply about this. But if you don't, maybe you can go back to your basement where you're from. And I can tell very much by what you've just said that there are people who just dwell in their basements like Cenk Uygur. It's absolutely disgusting. Well, good luck with that.
Cenk Uygur.
That was a good segue. Oh, so Cenk's thing is he just sort of screams sarcastically. All right, so Eylon, so here's the thing with like Palestinians and Israelis, right? It's like, oh, we're just gonna defend the IDF. It's like, whoa, I think I'm gonna break the microphone. Oh, so it's like simple, right? I hate people in debates who say right right? It means they're losing.
Right.
So it's because that means they haven't made the point. They're trying to look for the evidence. So it's simple, right? You don't make peace with your friends. You make peace with your enemies. Well, guess what, Cenk? You have to beat your enemies first, victoriously. Oh, just defending the IDF. Whoa, so this is just like ridiculous. So just you're just a propagandist. So, okay, I'm hungry.
Now do Candace.
Oh, boy. Candace Owens' impression?
Yeah, you need to help me for our interview we're going to have.
You're going to have Candace on? Oh, okay. She pronounces it Israel, which I find kind of weird. She always says Israel, but that's all I have so far. Yeah, I'll have to cook that one up.
Michael Rappaport.
My Michael Rappaport is like, he's great at advocating, but he always looks like he's in serious pain. She's like, Eylon Levy, pick Donald Trump. God, not gonna vote for the guy. I just had surgery. Where's the apartheid, bitch? Show me the apartheid. Can I say bitch? I don't know. State of the nation. It's a great nation. That's Rappaport. Okay. Let me some water. Show me the apartheid. Benny, show me the apartheid. Okay. Who else?
Give me your best Donald Trump.
Well, look, I thought this was Elon Musk. Where's Elon Musk? I thought this was an Elon Musk interview. That's okay. Eylon Levy's a great guy. Great guy. I think you got to take care of it. You know, when they asked me about the two-state solution, I said, we'll take a look at it. That's my answer. We'll take a look at it. But when I come back, I don't know when this is. It might be after, but we're still going to be fighting so strongly for the American people, for the Israeli people, and these Hamassos, they have to be destroyed. We got to take them out so strongly. And, you know, there's a lot of stray cats here, and they're eating the dogs and they're eating the cats in my country. So maybe we can bring some people here to take care of that cat problem that you have there, because it's a problem. And we got to do it, and we're going to do it so well, and you know that very strongly. Eylon Levy's a great guy. Great guy. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Well, in the interest of bipartisanship, I guess you've got to do Kamala Harris now.
Oh, what's the question?
Why is it so important to speak up for Israel?
Okay, well, let me be clear, and I think it's important. We need Israel. On October 7th, Israel experienced a tragedy, there's no question. And we need to speak up, not down and not middle, but up, because as you speak up to the sky, that is where your voices can be heard so loudly and so strongly. And I think that Israel has every right to defend itself, and I will always make sure that Israel has every right to defend itself, and I am proud that we restricted them from going to Rafah and didn't give them those 2,000-pound bombs. So I am saying one thing and another thing, and who knows? What, you think you just fell out of a coconut tree? So I hope that was clear.
Jordan Peterson.
Ha! Well, you know, I don't really like the way the question is formulated, because you're... Eylon, you know, it's like, well, what's the question? Give me one question. You know, it's not simple. It's not. What's the question?
Finally.
Well, I didn't answer. Hold on. A little bit more. So it's like Israel is a shining city on a hill. You know, when you're doing that, trekking your way through the abyss. You know, it's into the abyss of hell. You know, living in a situation that's not simple. It's not. So Israel needs to stand up straight with its shoulders back and be a bloody lobster. That's what I would say, even though it's not kosher. So.
And finally, Ami, on the long list of guests we're planning on inviting to State of a Nation, off the back of our very successful debate in New York, give me your best Mehdi Hassan.
So Mehdi looks like someone sat on his face, so it's like, and his whole strategy is just, you know, he does this tricky thing where he doesn't make his own points. He always says it's somebody else. And I'm not just saying that, but every single human rights organization, UN Watch, Amnesty International Plus, Israel Haiti Plus, Al Jazeera Plus, every single organization has said this. Israel's committing a genocide. That is not my opinion. Every single organization. That's what I've got so far.
Ami, you're an absolute
And I'm wearing the pin. Thank you.
At least you're wearing the pin. He didn't. Ami Kozak, thank you very much for coming on State of a Nation.
Pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode of State of a Nation. As always, if you enjoy these episodes, please follow and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube especially. Follow us on all social media platforms. It's State of a Pod. That's the handle. That's not the name of the show. Share the link with friends who you think will be educated or entertained.
Every single organization. Yeah.
Every single organization. Follow us on every single platform. I'm Eylon Levy, and thanks for joining.